Eric Mangini, former Jets coach, Browns coach, Fox Sports analyst. Listen, it's the most important position. The good news is you could get Derek Carr for the right number. You could get Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the roster's too good to come back next year. I just said it earlier. Mike White, Josh Allen, 2 times a year. That's not what I want to do. I mean, I think you have to own your mistakes, don't you, on Zach Wilson?
Yeah, I was watching the game last night, and when Zach Wilson was on the sideline, I don't know how you recover from that. And going into the game, it was his second chance. He had done some nice things the game before. He showed some signs of life, and you think, okay, maybe he learned from the time that he had to sit down, and there just wasn't anything that you could take away from that.
Yeah.
Where, as an organization, you're saying this is the guy that's going to continue to grow, and this is the guy that's going to help us get us to where we want to be, and they're closer to where they want to be with the team they have now than they've been in a long time.
Yeah, if they can get a left tackle in the draft and a Carr or a Garoppolo, I absolutely think this is the kind of team defense Joe Douglas has proven he can hit some home runs in the draft. I think they'd be a real team. So you know New England very, very well. I said this yesterday. Bobby Knight went from national titles to winning games at Texas Tech to not embracing the one and done to it's over. Is when cultures change. If you don't embrace the three-point shot, Greg Popovich didn't, not very relevant. Bobby Knight didn't embrace the one and done. The handling of Mac Jones is so clunky and tone deaf to the sport. I don't know. I could see Kraft talking to Bill and saying, listen, I'll pay you, go to Jupiter and Gulf, Florida. It looks like, I know it sounds like a hot take, but Robert Kraft is a billionaire for a reason. He's bottom line, Eric.
Yeah, and Mr. Kraft has been willing to take chances that other owners haven't. When he brought Bill in, remember, he traded a first-round draft pick for Bill, and here's a guy that had one really a inconsistent record in Cleveland, and he took a chance that nobody else would have at that time, and he was right. And he is willing to take those chances. Now they've got a long-term relationship. They've shared so many things over time. I would imagine that the leeway for Bill is significantly longer than most head coaches. And the transition from a Hall of Fame quarterback to that next phase is hard. And we see it everywhere. We see it in New Orleans. We see it in Indianapolis. We see it in Pittsburgh. It's not an easy thing to do. And they're trying with Mac Jones. There's a lot more with Mac Jones to be encouraged about. And I know it's hard to say that at this point, but based off of what they did last year, I don't think that they're ready to make a major organizational shift after this season.
So Mike McCarthy, I went and delivered the numbers, the raw data to the audience earlier. When he had Aaron Rodgers in his prime, he certainly didn't ruin him. Aaron without him, Aaron with him, mostly the same. He took an old Brett Favre, went 13-3. Old Favre with him, old Favre without him, was about the same. Dak Prescott's actually better with Mike McCarthy. As a former coach, if he loses this weekend, Dak won't face it. McCarthy will get crushed. Are there things that Mike McCarthy does that you like, that you think he's a little undervalued? What is his strength, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, Mike had a great situation. When you go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, that's pretty amazing, and that's the type of transition that we'd love to have. And there's a lot of creative elements to his offense, and I think he does a good job of balancing the running game with the passing game. And here's a guy who obviously likes to pass the ball more than he likes to run the ball, but he's got enough perspective and maturity to see where the team is and realize that their strengths in the running game. He gets killed a lot in Dallas because there's so much expectation based off the contracts they've paid certain players.
Yeah.
That I don't think it's a fair evaluation of how he's done as a coach. There's this assumption when he came in that they were Super Bowl ready, and that's not really where they were. And that's more a function of the perspective of the organization as opposed to his job as a head coach.
Yeah, you can argue Zeke is overpaid. Dak's a little overpaid. Jalen Smith was paid, and they had to get out of it. DeMarcus Lawrence, probably a little overpaid. Micah Parsons will absolutely get paid. That's not to say they don't deserve money, but you're right. When you get the big money, there's a sense of what you are, and a lot of times the money isn't the player.
And you and I have talked about it a bunch, Colin, whether it's in free agency or whether it's second contracts. Guys get paid a ton of money based off what the market is, not because they've improved substantially as a player. They're exactly the same player, but as soon as they get this gigantic contract, there's this expectation that they're suddenly going to take some sort of jump. You're paying a guy for who he was and expecting that level of production. You're not saying he's going to take some amazing jump because you had to overpay for him. It's like housing. You overpay for a house. It's the same house. You just overpaid for it.
Right. So Aaron Rodgers in Men's Health talks about ayahuasca, self-love. It was a great journey. And, I kind of roll my eyes. I wouldn't talk about that stuff publicly, but to each his own. Aaron's kind of an ethereal, he's an out there. He puts everything out there. Good for him. But it is interesting. If they go to Miami and lose, they don't make the playoffs, I'm going to throw something at you. You know Mike Vrabel. I'm going to throw it at you. Run-centric teams, Cleveland with Chubb. Cowboys with Zeke. Titans with Derrick Henry. You're not beating Mahomes with that. You're not beating Burrow with that. You're not, you know what I mean? And I look at Derrick Henry, who's got a lot of innings. Last 4 years, a lot. And now they got to pay him again. And my takeaway is this is when you move off the back. And I think it's time Mike Vrabel with Brady knows. He looks at Burrow, Allen, Herbert. Here comes Deshaun Watson. Here comes Trevor Lawrence. You know Vrabel. I think if Aaron, if it doesn't feel great at the end of the year in Green Bay, I think he's going to go after him. I really do. And I think Green Bay will take the phone call. Am I nuts?
I would imagine that most teams, if Aaron Rodgers became available, would go after him. With the assumption that you could get him. I don't know how Green Bay could possibly get out of the contract the way that it's structured with the amount of dead money. But let's say they could. If you could get Aaron Rodgers in Tennessee, and Mike is the type of guy that if he was ever going to make that type of move, he would sit down and he would be very honest with expectations. He would be very honest with who he is, how he runs his program. And if you have that going into it, and there's no false pretense, it's not about recruiting a guy and giving him total control of your organization. This is who we are. This is what we're going to do. This is what our expectation of you is. Are you in? And if he was in, yeah, you'd love to have Aaron Rodgers. And almost any team would, unless you've got one of the elite guys.
Yeah, by the way,
but you've got to get him with that honesty, that honest conversation going into it.
Yeah, I want you here in the offseason. We've got young players. You've got to be in, Aaron. By the way, Green Bay can get out of it if Jordan Love can play, and they know by now, because you pay him nothing for 2 more years, that dead cap hit of $16 million next year, you're not paying Jordan Love anything. And by the way, you're not paying Watson.
But I think the dead cap. I think the dead cap hit though is way more in the $50 to $90 million range.
I know if he went, there's 2 years where you pay a lot for it. But remember, Christian Watson now starter free. Romeo Doubs starter free. Jair Alexander you're paying. Bakhtiari, Aaron. Not a lot of big contracts there. There's a lot of good young players you're not paying anything for. And if you get the right picks for Aaron and hit on them, there's 3 or 4 more starters you're not paying anything for. Remember, they let the center go to the Chargers. So it's not one of those things where you're loaded with 8, like the Rams, where you're kind of backed up on a lot of big contracts.
And look, people are willing to eat way more dead money than they used to be, whether it was Russell Wilson. There's been a few examples where the amount of dead money that teams absorb to move on from a guy is pretty amazing, because it does. Look, it limits your ability to maneuver with the rest of the roster for a year or two. But teams are changing. It's interesting, though, the Russell Wilson experience is definitely going to make people take a step back, though, with guys that have been elite and think, okay, what am I really getting here?
Okay, finally, Brock Purdy. There's 2 games now. We've got a lot of film on him now. Do you expect a little pullback now that people know what he can do and maybe know what he can't do?
Well, I do worry about his decision-making to some degree. His interception to touchdown ratio in college, it wasn't as bad as some, but it wasn't the extreme, high end of touchdowns, low end of picks. And he takes some chances that he's gotten away with here in the first 2 games.
Yeah.
I think there's 1 or 2 drop picks. So he's benefited from that to some degree. As long as he understands his role and he doesn't put too much pressure on himself to be the guy. And look, Tom Brady, in our first run to the Super Bowl, we had 3 offensive touchdowns in the playoffs. That's it. Like, as long as you understand how good your defense is, how good your running game is, how good your playmakers are, and that I don't need to be the reason that we win, but I definitely can't be the reason that we lose, then I like his chances moving forward, and they're going to do a good job of protecting him.
Yep. Christian McCaffrey now. Deebo Samuel comes back in a couple of weeks. That's less of a burden on Brock Purdy. Eric Mangini, happy holidays. Your flight's canceled. It's going to be in New York. You'll have fun. New York's a lot of fun during the holidays.
Thank you, Colin. Have a great holiday.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.